When you hear a voice that resonates deeply with your spirit, you must understand something. It's never just about sound waves hitting your ear. It's never just about a tone, a cadence, or even the charisma of the one speaking. That voice is a vessel, and vessels are not created overnight. They are formed, shaped, and molded through seasons of trial, silence, waiting, and obedience. When you ask who is behind this voice, the true answer is not just a person, it is a life, a calling, a set-apart journey that God has prepared to carry a message that was never meant to stay locked within one individual. The voice you hear today is the echo of a much larger story, one that involves God's hand guiding, pruning, and positioning. See, we often take voices for granted. We hear thousands of them every day. Commercials, conversations, news anchors, social media influencers. Everybody is talking, but not every voice carries weight. Not every voice has authority. Not every voice cuts through the noise and pierces the heart. The voice that carries God's truth cannot be manufactured, cannot be mimicked, and cannot be imitated. Why? Because it's not the product of talent, it's the product of surrender. The person behind this voice had to be broken before they could be built, emptied before they could be filled, silenced before they could speak with power. That's why when God chooses a vessel, He doesn't choose the most polished or the most obvious. He doesn't necessarily pick the one with the loudest platform or the smoothest delivery. He picks the one who has been hidden, the one who has been refined in private, the one who knows what it means to wrestle with Him in the dark until the breaking of day. That's why when you hear a voice like this, you're not just hearing information, you're experiencing impartation. You're not just hearing ideas, you're touching testimony. And let's be honest, part of what gives a voice its power is not just the words it speaks, but the life that stands behind it. A voice becomes authentic when it's been tested. A voice becomes trustworthy when it's been through storms and still clings to truth. A voice becomes transformative when it has walked through fire but refuses to be consumed, when it has wrestled with doubt yet chooses to stand on faith. This is why you feel something when certain voices speak. It's not emotional manipulation, it's the residue of God's presence carried through the testimony of a life surrendered. Think about Moses. Moses wasn't just a man with words, he was a man with wounds. He stuttered, he doubted, he ran from his calling. Yet when God touched his mouth, his voice became the vehicle through which a nation was set free. Jeremiah was young and afraid, yet God told him, "Do not say, I am only a youth, for I have put my words in your mouth." Paul, once a persecutor, became the voice of the gospel to the Gentiles. Do you see the pattern? The voice God uses is rarely the one people would expect. It is not about impressiveness, it is about obedience. So who is behind this voice? It is someone who has learned that their life is not their own. It is someone who understands that when God calls you, He doesn't just give you a message, He makes you the message. Every scar, every failure, every moment of waiting, every tear cried in silence becomes part of the sound you hear. The authority of a voice is not in its volume, but in its authenticity. The weight of a voice is not in its eloquence, but in its experience. When God speaks through someone, you don't just hear words, you hear history. You hear His story woven into theirs. And that's why you can't dismiss a voice that comes from God's choosing. Because behind that voice is not just personality, it's preparation. Behind that voice is not just charisma, it's character. Behind that voice is not just speech, it's spirit. And when spirit-filled words meet a ready heart, transformation happens. Here's the part we must not overlook. God doesn't anoint voices for entertainment. He anoints them for assignment. If you find yourself moved, stirred, or even convicted by what you hear, that's not accidental. That's not coincidence. That's God reaching into your life through the vessel of another. That's God saying, I have something for you. I have direction for you. I have encouragement for you. Listen carefully, because I am speaking to you through this channel, through this moment, through this very voice. The temptation, of course, is to put too much focus on the vessel and forget the one who fills it. We can get caught up in the person and miss the presence. But the real power behind any voice God uses is never the person, it's the Spirit operating through them. The person is simply the carrier. The treasure is not in the clay jar, because the jar is so special. The treasure is in the jar, to prove that the surpassing greatness belongs to God, not to man. So I'll say it again, the voice is not just a sound, it's a vessel, and vessels must be chosen, vessels must be prepared, and vessels must be surrendered. That's who's behind this voice, not just an individual, but a living testimony of God's faithfulness, God's discipline, God's mercy, and God's power to take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. And here's where it comes full circle, because just as God raises up one voice to speak into your life, He may be preparing you to be a voice for someone else. Don't think for a moment that you are merely a consumer of encouragement, inspiration, or truth. No, God is also shaping your story, forming your testimony, and preparing your voice to carry something only you can give. The person behind this voice is evidence of what God can do when someone surrenders. The next voice could be yours. So the next time you hear a word on this channel, don't just ask, "Who is speaking?" Ask, "What is God saying to me through this vessel?" Because behind the voice you hear is the hand of God, and behind that hand is an invitation to listen, to respond, and to let Him use your life in the same way. Let me leave you with this thought. God never wastes a voice, and He never wastes a vessel. If He's speaking through this one, it's because He has chosen this exact moment to reach you. Don't take it lightly. Don't brush it aside. Behind the voice is a vessel, and behind the vessel is a God who refuses to let you miss His message. The voice you hear is not just sound. It is God's reminder that He sees you, He knows you, and He is calling you right now. When we ask who is behind this voice, we must look deeper than the surface, because the voice you hear isn't simply the product of personality, talent, or education. No, this voice was forged. It was formed in the unseen, shaped through silence, tears, and struggle. Behind every voice that carries the weight of God's presence, there is a process, and that process is never easy. It's one thing to admire the sound, but it's another to understand the sacrifice that makes the sound meaningful. You see, God never entrusts His message to someone who hasn't been tested. Before a voice is trusted, it has to go through seasons of pruning. The words you hear don't come cheap. They are the fruit of trials, of nights spent questioning, of days filled with uncertainty. A person may open their mouth to speak, but what gives their words weight is not just their vocabulary, it's their journey. It's the scars that don't show on the microphone. It's the moments when they had every reason to quit, but chose instead to hold on to God's hand. This is why you can tell the difference between a voice that merely speaks and a voice that carries something. One comes from theory, the other comes from testimony. One is about information, the other is about impartation. That distinction is critical, because when God raises up a voice, He doesn't just give someone words, He gives them wounds that heal others. He gives them battles that become bridges. He gives them victories that create vision for those still in the fight. Think about David. Before David ever picked up a harp to write a psalm or a stone to face a giant, he was hidden in the fields. He was overlooked by his family, underestimated by his peers, and yet it was in those hidden years that his voice was shaped. The songs he wrote didn't come from comfort. They came from caves, from deserts, from betrayal, from running for his life. That's why they still resonate thousands of years later. His words carried depth because his life carried weight. In the same way, when you listen to a voice that God has chosen, you're not just hearing the person, you're hearing the process. You're hearing the wilderness they endured, the isolation they survived, the refining fire they walked through. And whether you realize it or not, that's why your heart responds. That's why something inside you shifts when you hear them, because your spirit recognizes the fingerprints of God on their story. But here's something we often miss. The voice you hear today did not sound like this in its beginning. Early on, it may have been uncertain, timid, unsure of its place. That's the beauty of God's refining process. He doesn't call the most confident, He calls the most surrendered. He doesn't need someone who thinks they already have the answers. He needs someone willing to depend on Him for the answers. Over time, through failure and faith, through silence and struggle, that dependence gives birth to authority. Authority is not the ability to speak louder than others, it's the ability to speak with the weight of heaven behind you. And here's where it becomes deeply personal for you, because you may hear this voice and think, well, that's them, that's their story, that's their calling. But don't miss the point. God often lets you hear someone else's voice, not to idolize them, but to inspire you. He wants you to see what is possible when a life is yielded to Him. The person behind this voice is not perfect, not superhuman, not without struggle. They are evidence of what God can do with someone who says, yes. They are a living testimony that your wounds don't disqualify you, they prepare you. That's why it matters that you understand who is behind this voice, not because the person themselves is the focus, but because the God who shaped them is the same God shaping you. Every time you listen, you are being invited into a bigger story, a reminder that your process, though painful, has purpose. The very struggles you resent today may become the authority behind your voice tomorrow. There's also something sobering here, because if God has taken someone through the fire in order to entrust them with a message, then what you are hearing is not casual, it is sacred, it is weighty, and to dismiss it would be to dismiss the process that God Himself ordained. That doesn't mean you idolize the vessel, it means you honor the cost. It means you recognize that what reaches your ears today was born in someone else's midnight hour. And if you really think about it, this explains why some words bounce off your heart and others penetrate to the core. Words without process are like seeds scattered on stone. They sound good, but they don't take root. Words born of fire, however, carry something different. They carry life, they carry evidence, they carry the breath of God. That's why Scripture tells us that the Word became flesh. It didn't just stay abstract, it became embodied. Likewise, the words you hear from a vessel God has prepared are not abstract ideas, they are embodied truth, carried in flesh and blood, lived out in real time. So when you hear this voice, understand, behind it is someone who has walked where you walk, questioned what you question, and endured what you endure. Their difference is not that they avoided hardship, it's that they surrendered it. They handed it over to God, and in return, God gave them a voice with the power to speak into your life. That's the beauty of the kingdom. God takes the broken and makes them bridges. He takes the overlooked and makes them overcomers. He takes the hidden and makes them heralds. Behind every voice He uses is a story that proves His faithfulness, His wisdom, and His ability to turn pain into purpose. So let me leave you with this thought. When you hear a voice that stirs your soul, don't just ask, who is speaking? Ask, what did it cost them to carry this sound? What process did God take them through so that these words could reach me today? Because when you honor the process, you honor the God behind it. And when you honor God's process in someone else, you prepare yourself for the process He wants to do in you. Behind this voice is not just a person, but a process. And that process is proof that God wastes nothing. If He can use their scars to speak life into you, He can use yours to speak life into someone else. When we come to the final point, understanding that God doesn't just raise up voices for the sake of speaking, but to impact lives, we begin to see the bigger picture. Behind every voice He appoints, there is an assignment. And if you miss the assignment, you miss the purpose of the voice. The voice isn't here to entertain, to impress, or to draw attention to itself. It is here to awaken something in you. It's meant to stir you, to realign you, to draw you closer to God's plan for your life. That's why you can't afford to take lightly what you're hearing, because if you do, you risk not just ignoring the messenger, but missing the message God intended for you. Think of it this way: God could have chosen any number of ways to communicate with His people. He could have written words in the sky, spoken audibly from heaven, or used angels as His primary messengers. But consistently, He chooses human voices. He takes flawed, imperfect vessels and puts His word in their mouths, so that when they speak, you hear something more than human. It's not about the charisma of the speaker, it's about the Spirit moving through the words. And if you listen with humility, If you listen with an open heart, those words can literally shift the trajectory of your life. But here's the challenge. We often resist the voices God sends because they don't come packaged the way we expect. We want God's voice to sound comfortable, familiar, maybe even flattering, but the voices He raises often challenge us, convict us, or push us beyond what feels safe. That's because their purpose isn't to reinforce your comfort, it's to pull you into your calling. When God puts a word in someone's mouth, it is designed to disrupt the patterns that are keeping you stuck. It's designed to break through the lies you've believed, the voices you've listened to that were never from Him. This is why spiritual discernment is so critical, because there are many voices in this world competing for your attention, voices of culture, voices of fear, voices of doubt. But when God raises up a voice, you will know it by the fruit it produces in your life. It doesn't just make you feel good for a moment, it makes you stronger. It doesn't just inspire you, it changes you. It realigns your thinking, reshapes your perspective, and renews your hope. And this is how you know that God is truly behind it, because it points you back to Him. But let's make this even more personal. The real power of understanding who is behind this voice isn't just in admiring it from a distance. It's in asking yourself, what is God saying to me through this? What am I supposed to do with what I'm hearing? Because a word unheeded is a word wasted, and God doesn't waste His words. If He allows you to hear them, it's because He's trying to draw something out of you. Maybe He's calling you to heal from past wounds. Maybe He's calling you to step into a new season of faith. Maybe He's calling you to let go of voices that have been misleading you. Whatever it is, His voice through this vessel is meant to create movement in your life. There's also another layer here that's worth considering. If God can raise up one voice to impact you, what makes you think He doesn't want to raise up your voice to impact someone else? The voices you admire today were once hesitant, unsure, even hidden. They didn't start strong, they started surrendered. And that's the same invitation for you, to stop disqualifying yourself because of your past, your flaws, or your failures. God uses voices not because they're flawless, but because they're willing. He doesn't need perfection, He needs obedience. And if you will allow Him to process you, just like He processed the voices you admire, your life can become a message too. So when you listen, listen with both ears open, one ear to receive, and the other to prepare. Receive what God is saying to you today, but also prepare for the possibility that He may want to speak through you tomorrow, because the kingdom isn't about a handful of people carrying the weight of God's voice. It's about every believer becoming a living echo of His truth. What you hear today may be the very seed God intends to multiply through your life in the future. This is why humility matters, because when we dismiss a voice God has raised up, we not only shut our ears to the message, but we also shut our hearts to the process He may want to do in us. Every time you hear someone God has anointed, you have a choice. You can critique the vessel, or you can catch the vision. You can focus on their imperfections, or you can open yourself to the perfection of the God who speaks through them. And the choice you make determines what you receive. Let me be clear, this voice is not here to replace God in your life. It's here to redirect you back to Him. That's what makes it different from the noise of the world. Culture's voices want to make you more dependent on them. God's voices want to make you more dependent on Him. So when you hear someone speaking truth into your spirit, don't just say, "That was good." Ask yourself, what will I do with this truth? How will I let it shape me? How will I let it move me closer to the destiny God has for me? Because here's the reality. Hearing is not the same as heeding. Many people hear voices of truth, but few allow them to transform their lives. Don't let that be you. Don't let these words pass by as another moment of inspiration that fades tomorrow. Let it cut deep. Let it challenge you. Let it call you into more than you thought you could be. Because if you truly believe that God is behind the voice, then you must also believe that God is speaking directly to you through it. And here's where it all comes together. You're not listening by accident. You're not here by coincidence. The same God who shaped this voice, who gave it authority through trial and fire, arranged for you to hear it at this very moment. That's divine timing. That's divine orchestration. And the question is, what will you do with it? Will you let it stir you, change you,
propel you, or will you let it pass by, like background noise? The choice is yours, but don't miss the weight of this moment, because when God speaks, it is never casual, it is always intentional, always purposeful, always aimed at awakening something inside of you. The voice you hear is not an accident, it is an assignment, and the reason God allowed you to hear it is because He's calling you to rise, to respond, and to step boldly into the life He's been preparing for you all along.